The first thing Jake Harder noticed was that the girl on the slave platform was standing too straight for someone about to be sold. The hidden dock hung in the shadow of a dead moon, all rusted girders, leaking vapor, and ugly floodlights that turned every face the color of old bone. Starling was berthed 2 levels above the market, supposedly just long enough to patch a torn cargo seal and unload scrap capacitors no honest station would buy. Jake had one glove off, a sealant gun in his hand, and exactly 0 plans to get involved in anything dramatic. Then he looked down. The auction ring sat in the center of the lower deck like a wound cut into metal. Cages lined the outer rail. Traders barked numbers in 3 languages. Armed brokers moved through the crowd with the relaxed swagger of men who believed cruelty counted as business. And there, under a hard beam of white light, stood the alien girl. Her wrists were bound behind her back. Her silver-blue clothing had been torn at the shoulder. There was dried blood near her temple and a bruise darkening along her throat where some idiot had clearly used force instead of sense. But none of that was what caught Jake. It was the way she held her chin. Not proud exactly. Not defiant either. More like dignity had become the only thing nobody here had managed to take. Jake leaned over the rail. Luke, crouched beside an open maintenance panel, glanced up at him and immediately swore. No. Jake didn't look away. I haven't said anything. You don't need to. You've got the face. What face? The one that ruins my day. Jake finally turned. There's a girl down there getting sold. Luke jabbed a tool at him. There are always people getting sold in places like this. That's why these places exist. And that's supposed to make it normal? No, Luke said, quieter now. It's supposed to remind you we're 1 freighter, 2 idiots, 1 medic, and a cyborg with anger issues away from being dead if you improvise badly. From inside the maintenance shaft, Zane Mercer's distorted voice echoed up. Correction. My anger issues are exceptionally well organized. Jake looked back down. The girl lifted her head at the wrong moment and met his eyes across 2 levels of rusted steel, noise, and smoke. He expected panic, pleading, the desperate bargain of someone hoping a stranger might grow a conscience on schedule. Instead, he got recognition, not of him, of the decision on his face. She knew instantly what kind of man he was. That sealed it. Jake exhaled once. Luke, his brother closed his eyes briefly like a man accepting divine punishment. Yeah, I need a distraction. You always need a distraction. This one with sparks. Luke muttered something deeply insulting under his breath and slid back into the maintenance panel. 2 minutes. If this goes wrong, I'm haunting you in advance. Jake smiled faintly. That's brotherhood. He moved fast after that. Down the stairwell. Across a suspended catwalk. Through a knot of dockworkers arguing over fuel rates. He shrugged into a stained loader jacket he found hanging from a hook, palmed a cutting torch from an unattended toolbox, and walked straight into the lower market with the tired confidence of a man who looked like he belonged there. Nobody stopped him. Criminal places loved uniforms more than honesty. On the platform, the broker was mid-pitch. Rare bloodline specimen, he shouted. Unregistered. Educated. Responsive to high command dialects. Bidding starts at. The reactor alarm hit. It was magnificent. Every siren on the dock changed pitch at once into a screaming mechanical howl. Red lights flashed. Vents slammed shut. Overhead speakers crackled with Luke's voice filtered through station static. Emergency warning. Core instability detected. Thermal breach, cascade in progress. Dock evacuation recommended for anyone interested in living. Panic worked exactly the same in every species. Heads turned. Guards looked up. Bidders started shouting over each other. Somewhere above, something exploded loudly enough to feel expensive. Jake used the moment. He stepped onto the platform, cut through the binding field emitter with one hot snap of the torch, and caught the girl by the arm before she stumbled. "Can you run?" he asked. She blinked once, shocked more by the question than the rescue. "Yes." "Great. I'm Jake. Today is terrible." The nearest guard recovered first and raised his rifle. Jake threw the torch in a man's face shield, grabbed the dropped shock baton from the broker, and swung hard enough to put him over a crate rail. The girl moved instantly, faster than anyone with bruised wrists had a right to, kicking another slaver in the knee and driving her shoulder into his chest. Jake grinned despite himself. Okay, I like you. Blaster fire ripped across the platform. Luke's voice came through Jake's earpiece. Exit route just became exciting. When is it ever not? Fair point. Left corridor. 30 meters. Also Zane says he has solved transportation. That sentence worries me. It should have. A cargo hauler burst through a side partition in a shower of sparks. Half the front assembly missing, and Zane welded into the driver cradle like a furious metal gargoyle. One mechanical arm held the steering yoke. The other was busy firing a stolen sidearm through the windshield slot. I found us a ride, Zane announced. Please admire how little consent was involved. Jake shoved the girl onto the back platform and jumped up beside her as the hauler fishtailed around a fallen support beam. Guards fired from the catwalks. Luke dropped from an overhead ladder onto the rear rail, rolled once, and shot the lock off a closing blast gate before they hit it. The girl braced herself against the frame, breathing hard. Up close, Jake saw the pendant at her throat. Dark metal, old design, a faint pulse of blue light under the grime. Luke noticed it too. That is not decorative. No kidding, Jake said. Behind them, the dock alarms shifted again. Not evacuation now. Pursuit. Emma Hayes met them at Starling's open ramp with a med kit in one hand and a pistol in the other. Please tell me you brought back something besides trauma. Jake jumped down and helped the girl with him. Possible war. Emma sighed. Of course. They got clear of the dead moon on stolen minutes and bad judgment. 3 days later, while Lyra still refused to sleep with the lights off and Emma was treating the bruises hidden under royal silence, Starling landed in a canyon for water condensate. That was when the women came. They emerged over the ridge in silent formation, armored, masked, carrying curved rifles and old banners that moved in the wind like remembered vows. There were dozens of them, then hundreds. Jake stepped off the ramp with Luke at his side. The lead warrior saw Lyra appear behind him and dropped to one knee. Then all the others did too. And the eldest among them lifted her eyes to Jake and said, "The pendant chose true. Our lost daughter has been returned by the Outworld Guardian." Lyra went pale. Then she whispered, "You should have left me there. The Empire will burn worlds to take me back." Lyra tried to leave before sunrise, which told Jake everything he needed to know about how badly she was hurting. Starling's cargo bay was dark except for one hanging work light and the thin blue strips running along the floor plates. Outside the open side hatch, dawn on the canyon world looked cold and colorless, all gray rock and low mist. Jake had gotten maybe 90 minutes of sleep in the mechanic's alcove before instinct pulled him awake. He found Lyra halfway down the loading ramp with a small pack slung over one shoulder and the stubborn posture of someone who had already decided her suffering would be easier to carry alone. "Seriously?" Jake said. Lyra froze. For a second, she did not turn around. When she finally did, her expression held exactly zero surprise and far too much sadness. "You humans sleep lightly." Jake folded his arms. "We also notice when our rescued alien guest steals out before breakfast." "I'm not your guest." "No," he said. "You're the reason a canyon full of armed women call me a prophecy problem." That almost got a smile. Almost. She looked past him toward the dark interior of the ship where everyone else still slept. "If I stay, they die with me near them. If I leave now, your crew still has a chance to disappear before the Empire finds this place." Jake came down the ramp one slow step at a time. "That sounds noble, which is usually how I know it's a terrible idea." Lyra's grip tightened on the strap of her bag. "You do not understand what haunts me." "Then explain it." "I can't. That's not the same thing." The silence between them stretched thin. Wind slid through the hatch and moved a strand of silver-black hair across her cheek. She looked exhausted in that deep way that had nothing to do with sleep. Emma had treated the bruises and cuts, but fear had a longer recovery time. Lyra lowered her eyes. "My bloodline was tied to command systems the Empire should never have touched. As long as I breathe, I am a key. If they fail to capture me, they will punish anything I stood near. Settlements. Ships. People." Her voice tightened. "You saved me once. Do not make it meaningless by trying twice. Then she turned to go. Jake reached out on instinct and caught her wrist. The pendant fused to her palm, detonated in light. Not an explosion. Something stranger. The metal flashed bright blue-white and sent a ring of symbols rippling across the cargo deck. Ancient characters poured out through the air like liquid math, rotating in layered circles over the floor plates, the walls, the ceiling. Starling shuddered from bow to stern. Deep in the hull, systems nobody had known existed suddenly woke up and began speaking in a language older than the Empire. Lyra gasped and dropped to one knee. Jake jerked back, but the symbols followed his hand for a heartbeat before scattering into a full projection map over the center bay. Stars appeared in impossible clusters. Routes drew themselves between them. Buried compartments inside, Starling lit green through the deck like veins under skin. Luke came sprinting in from the corridor with a wrench in one hand and a pistol in the other. Why is the cargo bay haunted? Emma was right behind him, already shoving sleep-tangled hair out of her face. Please tell me nobody touched the mysterious artifact. Jake lifted his hand slowly. Bad news. Of course. Emma looked at the blazing geometry across the bay and changed direction mid-sentence. Actually, weirdly, maybe good news. Hold still, both of you. She dropped to Lyra's side while Luke circled the projection with open disbelief. Symbols slid over his boots, reacting to his presence differently than they had to Jake's. Not rejecting him exactly. Sampling him. Testing. Tyler Brooks barreled in clutching a tablet and nearly tripped over a glowing route marker. I heard the hidden subsystem alarms and assumed we were all dying. I hate being almost right. Zane's voice crackled from the engine room intercom. If the ship has secretly developed ancient feelings, I demand hazard pay. Emma pressed a scanner to Lyra's neck, then to the pendant, then to Jake's wrist where the light had touched him. Her expression changed by degrees from concern to focus to outright professional alarm. Nora, she shouted. Nora Bennett arrived seconds later, still buttoning a med jacket and carrying a portable diagnostic kit like a weapon. She took one look at Lyra's readings and swore softly. Her system's crashing under the load. Heart rate irregular, neural stress climbing, endocrine cascade all over the place. She met Jake's eyes. Whatever that thing is, it's eating her alive. Lyra tried to rise and nearly collapsed. Jake caught her before she hit the deck. The pendant reacted again at contact, softer now, sending one clean strand of light up his arm and into the projection above them. A locked region of the star map opened. Luke stared. Then he looked at Jake. Then back at the map. I hate this already, Luke said. Do it again. That is not how medicine works, Nora snapped. That is exactly how discovery works. Tyler was already digging through stolen archive files on his tablet, fingers flying. Hold on. Hold on. I've seen something close to this. He enlarged a fragment from a sealed military record and read out loud. Unauthorized study of twin-linked bioreactive anomalies suspended by order of the Imperial Deep Archive. Jake blinked. Twin what? Luke leaned over the screen. Read the rest. Tyler swallowed. Observed resonance between relic navigation matrices and paired human neural patterns indicates possible ancestral bridge markers. Further investigation prohibited. He looked up slowly. That says you two are not random. Zane's intercom cracked again. I would like to formally object to being aboard the Chosen One's freighter. I signed up for mechanical failure, not mythology. Emma ignored him. She was studying the ship readouts now, eyes narrowing. These routes aren't just a map. They're authorization chains. Starling has dormant systems buried behind the freight architecture, and the relic just woke them. She looked at Jake's hand, then at Lyra. Somehow his nervous system is being read as compatible access. Lyra looked shaken in a way Jake had not seen before. Not fear of the Empire this time. Fear of the answer itself. That should be impossible. Luke's mouth twitched grimly. That phrase has been very busy lately. The light finally dimmed enough for them to move Lyra into the med alcove. Nora set up fluids and stabilizers. Emma monitored the relic pulse every 3 minutes. Tyler locked himself into the comms booth to scrub their signatures from local traffic. Jake stayed. He sat beside Lyra through the ship's artificial night, while the others worked around them in low voices. At one point, she woke and found him still there. "You're stubborn," she murmured. Jake looked up from the half-cold coffee in his hands. "I've heard that from experts." Her fingers shifted weakly against the blanket until he understood and let her take his hand. The pendant did not flare this time. It only warmed, like recognition instead of alarm. By morning, Tyler came into the med bay pale and silent. Nobody liked silent Tyler. Jake stood. "What happened?" Tyler held up the screen. "Imperial kill squad just entered the system."
The asteroid graveyard looked like the picked clean bones of a dead fleet. Broken cruisers drifted between spinning rock and torn metal, their cracked hulls flashing whenever distant starlight caught exposed plating. Starling moved through the wreck field like a wounded animal trying not to breathe too loudly. Every bolt in the freighter rattled. Every engine vibration sounded guilty. On the forward scope, the Imperial hunter-destroyer sat beyond the debris ring in perfect firing position, sleek and black and patient enough to be terrifying. Jake stared at the tactical overlay and said the obvious thing first. "We are not outrunning that." Luke didn't look up from the open panel under the comm station. "I appreciate this new phase of honesty, but it feels late." Tyler Brooks was already buried in signal traffic, one hand flying across the console while the other shoved cold coffee farther from sensitive components. "For the record, I'd also accept a miracle." Emma Hayes checked the med restraints around Lyra's arm and kept her voice level. "Miracles are off shift. You've got humans." From the engineering corridor, Zane Mercer's voice rolled up through the internal speakers. "Deeply mediocre humans, in several cases." Jake gave the forward screen one more hard look. The destroyer was holding distance because it didn't need to rush. That was the worst part. Real predators didn't chase when they already owned the exits. Around them, the asteroid graveyard turned in slow silence. Dead cargo haulers. Fractured mining rigs. Half a carrier split open like an empty shell. A whole battlefield, forgotten by history and now suddenly useful in exactly one way. Jake's eyes narrowed. Then he looked at Luke. Luke looked back. That was all it took. "No," Tyler said immediately. "I know that face exchange. I reject it." Jake moved to the central console. "How many wrecks in this field still have active power traces?" Tyler blinked. "Minimal traces?" "A lot." "Stable traces?" "Almost none." "Almost none is a hobby," Luke muttered, already grabbing tools. Lyra pushed herself upright from the co-pilot chair, still pale from the relic strain but sharper now than she had been in hours. "You are building a deception." Jake glanced at her. "You say that like it's a bad thing." "I say it like you should do it properly." That got his attention. Outside the viewport, the destroyer shifted by a fraction, enough to remind everyone that time was expensive. Jake looked at the wreck field again, then back to Tyler. "Flood local channels with fleet chatter. Not too clean. I want it messy enough to feel real." Tyler's hands hovered over the controls. "You want fake civilian panic, fake military encryption, or fake command traffic?" "Yes." "That is not a category." "It is now." Luke snapped his tool case shut. "I'm going outside." Emma turned in her chair. "No. I'm not asking." "You're injured." "I'm motivated." Jake was already strapping a mag harness across his chest. "He's not going alone." Emma stared at both twins with the expression of a woman reconsidering every life choice that had put her on this ship. "You two treat survival like a negotiation." "Only when the alternatives are rude," Jake said. Within 3 minutes, the bluff began to take shape. Luke launched first on the tether line, vanishing into the graveyard with a booster pack and a crate full of signal nails scavenged from Starling's buried smuggling compartments. Jake took the opposite direction, using the shadow of a fractured ore barge to cross toward a dead corvette drifting spine up through the rocks. They moved fast, silent, and familiar with danger in the casual way only twins could manage. Tyler built the voice of a fleet from almost nothing. He seeded the local spectrum with encrypted bursts, clipped command tags, false range-finding pings, and half-heard warning chatter. He made it sound like ships were holding their breath just outside the destroyer's sensor confidence. Then he layered in ghost transponders from Rex. Luke and Jake were wiring by hand, turning dead hulls into phantom weapons platforms. Chloe Dawson leaned over the console. That sounds almost believable. Tyler didn't look up. Almost believable gets us vaporized. I'm aiming for arrogant and classified. In the engine bay, Zane patched the last stolen amplifier into the ship's ancient broadcast spine. I should point out, he said, that if this works, I am technically an actor now, and I object on moral grounds. No you don't, Emma called. You are right. I object on aesthetic grounds. Lyra stepped beside Jake's open comm channel and listened to the enemy's clipped responses as Tyler baited them with fabricated traffic. Her face changed in tiny ways each time an Imperial officer spoke. She knew their habits. Their vanities. The shape of their fear. The commander is not cautious, she said quietly. He is ambitious. That matters. Jake adjusted the comm pickup on his collar. How? He does not want to survive this encounter, Lyra said. He wants to own it. Jake smiled slowly. Now that I can use. Luke's voice cracked over the private line from somewhere deep in the wreck field. Left flank decoys hot. One more relay and they'll think a cruiser group is hiding in the rocks. Jake wedged the final emitter into the dead corvette's cracked weapon mount. Right side's ready. Tyler inhaled sharply at the console. All right. We've got false lock signatures on 12 vectors and fleet shadow mass on 20 more. If he scans hard, the lie gets ugly. Jake climbed back through Starling's airlock, stripped off the mag harness, and dropped into the captain's chair like he'd been born there. He hadn't. But confidence was mostly posture plus timing, and Jake had both. Open direct channel, he said. Tyler did, then mouthed a silent prayer to every god of bad plans. The Imperial commander appeared as a blue hologram above the dash, long-faced and cold-eyed in black command armor. Unregistered human vessel, he said. Transmit surrender authorization and prepare to be boarded. Jake leaned back slightly, as if this was all beneath his schedule. Commander, you are currently targeting the forward scout of a concealed Terran strike group. I strongly advise you to reconsider your next 30 seconds. Silence. Then the commander's expression hardened. Terran what? Lyra, standing just out of view, whispered without hesitation. Do not threaten him. Insult his situational awareness. Jake didn't blink. If you haven't found the rest of us yet, that's not my failure. Tyler bit the inside of his cheek to stop a laugh. The commander's eyes flicked to a side display as Luke's planted emitters lit up in sequence. Suddenly the destroyer had weapons locks blooming around it from wreck sectors that had looked dead a moment earlier. Tyler injected clipped false traffic across open bands. Carrier wing set. Hold fire. Interceptor screen ready. Awaiting scout confirmation. Do not spook the target. Then Zane's voice entered the performance in a harsh military dialect so accurate it made even Lyra flinch. Casualty estimates revised. If the destroyer fires first, blast wash from hidden batteries will exceed acceptable loss thresholds. Again. Acceptable. He paused, then muttered on the same channel, I despise live performance. The commander's gaze sharpened. You expect me to believe a human fleet entered Imperial space unnoticed? Jake let the answer hang one beat too long. No. I expect you to explain to your superiors why you engaged without confirming how many of us came with me. That landed. Lyra added one final whisper. Now offer him a retreat that sounds like strategy, not fear. Jake nodded almost imperceptibly. Withdraw, file your contact report, and return with proper authority. Then maybe this becomes a border incident instead of your career's autopsy. The destroyer did not fire. On Tyler's board, enemy targeting flickered, recalculated, then fell back. One engine bloom. Then another. Slowly, angrily, the hunter-destroyer reversed out of the wreck field and turned toward open space. Nobody on Starling moved until the jump flare finally swallowed it. Then Chloe exhaled. Emma sat down hard. Tyler laughed once, high and stunned. Luke's voice came over comms from outside. Tell me that worked. Jake looked at Lyra, who was staring at the empty scope with dread replacing relief. It worked, she said softly. Too well. Tyler checked the intercepted retreat packet and went pale. The commander tagged us as confirmed human military contact, he whispered. Jake, the Empire now thinks humanity just entered the war. The cold got into everything. It lived in the refinery walls, in the cracked pipes, in the metal bunks bolted to the old station decks, and in the breath that fogged every corridor unless the heaters were working harder than they had any right to. The debris field beyond the portholes glittered like a frozen graveyard, huge slabs of ice rock tumbling through black space around the wrecked refinery Starling now called home. It was not much to look at. It was patched, drafty, underpowered, and half the doors only opened if someone kicked them with commitment. So naturally, it became home. Months passed that way. Not quickly. Not gently. Time in hiding had its own rhythm, and most of it was ugly. Jake spent mornings outside in a mag suit helping Ryan Cole weld support braces onto the refinery spine while Luke disappeared for hours into the lower vaults with the pendant's readings mapped across 3 tablets and a dangerous amount of curiosity in his eyes. Emma Hayes and Nora Bennett turned the old admin office into a medical bay that smelled like antiseptic, hot wiring, and exhaustion. Tyler Brooks kept their heat signature buried under junk radiation and curse words. Chloe Dawson and Kai Walker somehow made the place feel less like a coffin by drawing faces on storage bins, smuggling extra desserts from ration count, and refusing to let silence win for too long. Lyra changed with the station. At first she moved through the refinery like someone waiting to be sent away. She spoke softly, slept badly, and flinched any time a system alarm changed pitch. But hiding had a strange way of wearing down distance. Emma put her to work sorting med stock because injured hands needed purpose. Chloe taught her human slang with the confidence of somebody inventing half of it on the spot. Kai explained card games badly. Tyler let her watch the signal net. Nora made sure she ate real meals, not just tea and worry. And Zane Mercer, naturally, took personal offense to her formal vocabulary. You keep saying regrettable outcome when you mean disaster, Zane said one evening while elbow-deep in a busted heat exchanger. That is aristocratic cowardice. Lyra folded her arms. I am being precise. You are decorating catastrophe. She glanced at the live readings on the exchanger. Isn't that unit melting from the inside? Zane paused. That is different. It is doing so with mechanical dignity. Chloe laughed so hard she nearly dropped a toolkit. Even Jake smiled, though he was mostly watching Lyra smile back. That was how it started between them. Not one dramatic moment. 100 small ones. Shared night watches at the outer glass while the debris field turned slowly beyond them. Quiet conversations over burnt coffee. His jacket ending up around her shoulders when the station heat dipped. Her hand finding his wrist once, absent-mindedly, when a distant impact shook the hull harder than usual. Neither of them naming any of it. Both of them choosing it anyway. One night, during second watch, Jake found her alone on the upper catwalk staring out at the ice rock formations drifting beyond the refinery. You should be asleep, he said. Lyra kept looking out the glass. You say that every time. And one day you'll listen. She turned then, silver light from the station panels catching softly along her cheekbones. If I sleep, I dream of cages. Jake leaned against the rail beside her. No wise answer came. So he told the truth. If I sleep too deeply, I dream I was slower. That made her look at him properly. He shrugged, gaze fixed on the dark outside. You were already halfway gone when I got to that dock. There's a part of my brain that keeps replaying all the versions where I missed. Lyra was quiet for a while. Then she asked, very softly, do humans always carry guilt like it belongs to them? The good ones do. That almost broke her composure. Instead, she leaned a little closer until their shoulders touched through layers of station fabric and old fatigue. It was not a kiss. It was not even a confession. It was something quieter and maybe stronger. Permission. Below them, the refinery groaned in the cold and kept holding together. Luke, meanwhile, had become gloriously impossible. He stopped pretending the pendant was just a relic and started treating it like a problem with a locked door he intended to kick open. He ran scans through buried station arrays, traced resonance echoes into the surrounding debris field, and eventually came storming into breakfast one cycle with wild hair, bloodshot eyes, and the expression of a man who had discovered something deeply inconvenient. There are ships out there, he said. Tyler looked up from his ration bowl. There are always ships out there. We are on one. No, Luke snapped, spreading a star map across the table. Buried ones. Under the ice rock formations. Big ones. Ancient ones. The pendant's architecture keeps pinging them. Emma sighed into her coffee. That sentence feels like future trauma. Ryan leaned over the map. How big? Luke pointed to the density layers. Bigger than anything this station was built to process. Tyler whistled low. So we've been hiding next to a graveyard. Or an armory, Lyra said. The room went still. After that, everything sharpened. Patrols widened. Scanner sweeps deepened. Tyler began masking Lyra's biosignature under 3 rotating scrambler nets. Jake and Ryan started checking outer hull lines twice a day. Nora stocked emergency kits near every bulkhead. Zane reconfigured a mining laser into something he described as less industrial, more persuasive. Even Chloe and Kai felt it, the way comm had started to fray at the edges. Then the drones came. Chloe spotted the first one during a routine perimeter sweep. Jake, she said over comms, voice suddenly thin, you need to see this. He met her at the sensor alcove, Lyra right behind him, both of them still pulling on cold weather gloves. On the forward display, 3 dark shapes moved silently between the drifting ice masses. Smooth. Compact. No visible drive flare. No trade markings. Unknown drones. They weren't scanning the station. They were scanning one compartment. The biotag filter locked red across Lyra's signature line. Lyra went pale. Tyler swore. Luke stared at the screen like he'd been expecting trouble, just not this fast. One drone stopped, pivoted, and transmitted a tight encrypted burst into deep space. Jake's jaw tightened. They found us. Outside, more shapes began to emerge from behind the frozen rocks. The first drone died so quietly it almost felt impolite. Jake's rifle barely kicked against his shoulder before the round punched through the machine's sensor cluster and sent it spinning into the ice field in a trail of blue sparks. The other drones scattered instantly, splitting through the frozen debris like hunting fish that had just realized the prey could bite back. Too late, Tyler Brooks said at the sensor pit. That burst already went out. Luke was staring at the transmission path on 3 overlapping screens, jaw tight, eyes bright with the kind of focus that usually meant something reckless was about to become necessary. They weren't just marking the station, he said. They were triangulating below us. Jake turned. Below us where? Luke slapped the projection wider. Under the drifting ice rock formations, deep density shadows spread in massive geometric patterns that did not belong to natural debris. Now that the drones had pinged them, the shapes were impossible to ignore. Long hull lines. Engine cavities. Weapon spines buried under centuries of frozen compression. Ryan Cole leaned over the display and let out a low breath. Those are ships. Not ships, Lyra said, voice quiet and gone strange. A fleet. No one in the room said anything for half a second. Then everyone spoke at once. Emma demanded timelines. Chloe asked how deep the ice ran. Kai wanted to know if the station had ever been sitting on a war grave by accident. Zane's voice cut through the calm with practiced irritation. If anyone is about to suggest entering the haunted glacier because destiny is calling, I would like to be registered as hostile to the plan. Jake looked at Luke. Can you wake them? Luke didn't answer right away. He zoomed through scan layers, fed pendant resonance data into Tyler's signal model, then finally looked up with the strained expression of a man holding good news by the throat. Maybe, he said. If Lyra is what the drones were after, then her bloodline is the key. The relic doesn't just map routes. It authorizes systems. Lyra's hand went unconsciously to the pendant at her throat. If I touch the wrong thing, I might wake defense protocols too. Then we touch the right thing, Jake said. That was how the expedition started. They cut into the nearest ice mass with refinery drills, mining lasers, and one deeply offended salvage crawler Zane insisted had not consented to mythological labor. Jake and Ryan led the first team into the opening tunnel while Luke and Tyler stayed on comms above, mapping internal cavities as the shaft widened into something much older than the station. Frost smoked around their boots. Ice walls glowed blue where buried metal reflected the cutting beams. Every sound echoed too long, like the whole frozen field was listening. The tunnel opened into a vault. Not a cave. A hangar. Ancient black hull plating curved overhead beneath translucent ice, vast enough to swallow Starling whole and still have room for 10 more freighters. Rows of dormant vessels slept in the frozen dark, their outlines half hidden under centuries of mineral frost. Symbols lined the floor in concentric rings, dim and waiting. Jake stopped dead. Ryan swore under his breath. We've been living on top of this. Lyra stepped in last and the rings under her boots lit silver. The whole chamber answered her. Light raced outward through the floor pattern, leaping from circle to circle until the nearest buried warship flickered alive under the ice. Then another. Then 10 more deeper in the vault. What had looked like a graveyard became a city of sleeping weapons stirring under the glacier. Tyler's voice crackled over comms from the refinery. I'm seeing power spikes across the whole field. Luke's translating a command sequence. He says don't touch anything dramatic. Kai came through on the background channel. That sounds like instructions built specifically to fail around Jake. Jake ignored him and looked at the center of the vault where a monolithic command pillar stood fused into the floor like a blade driven into history. That's it, Lyra said. Luke joined them minutes later, breath fogging in the cold, tablet glowing with layered architecture models. The pillar routes command through lineage markers and external signal harmonics. Tyler thinks we can piggyback activation if we sync the pendant to the buried network. He glanced up at the enormous dark shape under the far ice wall and allowed himself one crooked smile. In better news, I was right and everyone else was wrong, which is always spiritually nourishing. Emma arrived with Nora and a field med kit. If this kills her, I'm sedating both Carter twins on principle. That feels medically biased, Jake said. It is. Lyra walked to the pillar before anyone could say more. Jake moved beside her anyway. She looked up at the frozen wall beyond the command core where the outline of a colossal dreadnought slept beneath the ice, larger than anything human shipyards had ever built. If this wakes, she whispered, everything changes. Jake stood close enough for her to hear the certainty in his breathing. Then let it. She placed her hand on the pillar. For one endless second, nothing happened. Then the ice field became dawn. Light burst from the command core in a flood of silver white, racing through the buried fleet in veins of impossible energy. The glacier overhead glowed from within. Ancient engines thudded awake far below their feet. Hull sections unfolded under the ice. Weapon channels hummed. The colossal dreadnought behind the wall opened one massive sensor array, and the entire frozen chamber lit so brightly Jake had to shield his eyes. Outside, Tyler shouted over comms. Bad news. The Empire saw that. Of course they had. Orbital alarms erupted across the station net as 3 Imperial attack ships dropped out of stealth at the edge of the debris field and began burning hard toward the awakening signatures. The hidden fleet had just announced itself to the stars. Get topside. Jake shouted. The transition from buried wonder to immediate war was brutally fast. By the time they reached the refinery command deck, the ancient dreadnought had broken free of the ice enough to expose its upper hull and command spine. It was still mostly buried, still waking, still incomprehensible in scale. Emma threw tactical overlays across the screens while Tyler routed external control through the pendant-fed command net. We do not know what half these systems do, Emma snapped. We only need the useful half, Luke shot back. Zane stomped through the hatch dragging a magnetic harness and a portable coil cannon. I am going outside. Nora blinked. Why? Because whoever designed this ship placed the auxiliary cannon controls on the exterior maintenance ring, Zane said, disgusted. If I die, please make sure history records that the vessel remained offensively impractical to the end. He launched out through the upper lock before anyone could stop him. Imperial fire lanced across the field. Ice exploded around the rising hull. Jake and Luke moved in parallel at the command board, twin instincts taking over where understanding ended. Luke flooded the local targeting grid with misaligned heat ghosts from the waking fleet while Jake rerouted active engine wakes through dead hull shadows, forcing enemy sensors to chase false firing lanes. They're buying it, Tyler said, stunned. They're buying confusion, Jake answered. Same difference. The dreadnought's first main gun finished charging. Emma looked up from the tactical feed, face lit white by the weapon arc. Jake, she said, suddenly very calm, tell me where to aim. Luke vanished in white fire and collapsing metal. 1 second he was on the inner command spine of the waking dreadnought, shouting for Jake to cut power to Section 9 because enemy boarders had reached the core access. The next second the corridor blew out in a blast of heat, fractured plating, and venting atmosphere so violent it ripped the whole passage into vacuum. Jake hit the emergency rail hard enough to bruise bone. Emma slammed against a console. Tyler disappeared under a shower of sparks. By the time the bulkhead seals crashed shut and the warning light stopped strobing, Luke was gone. They searched anyway. For 6 brutal hours they searched every torn corridor, every pressure pocket, every shattered maintenance shaft between the refinery vault and the dreadnought's half-awake inner decks. Ryan led one team. Nora led another. Chloe and Kai checked escape channels twice. Zane crawled through areas only a vindictive machine or a loving idiot would enter voluntarily. They found blood, scorched alloy, and one torn glove caught in a broken grate. Not a body. Not a signal. Not a word. Just absence. Jake stood in the docking cradle afterward with Luke's damaged tool band in his hand and learned something ugly about grief. If it arrived during a crisis, it did not ask permission to become background radiation. It simply stayed there, behind the eyes, under the ribs, inside every decision. We have to move, Emma said quietly. Jake didn't answer. The Empire saw the fleet wake up, Tyler added from the hatch. They'll be back with enough firepower to peel this whole field open. Still nothing. Lyra stepped into the cradle last. She looked pale, exhausted, and guilty in a way that made Jake angrier on her behalf than his own. She came close enough to touch him, then stopped like she wasn't sure she had that right anymore. He chose to hold the line, she said softly. That was not your failure. Jake's hand closed around Luke's tool band until the metal bit his palm. Didn't say it was. No, she said. You're carrying it like it is. That broke something, though not where anyone could see. Jake inhaled once, hard, and tucked the band into his jacket. When he finally looked up, command had settled over his grief like armor over a wound. Get everyone aboard Starling, he said. We disappear. So they did. The next stretch of time blurred into bad fuel, hidden ports, coded bribes, and deeper layers of underworld space where no government admitted to having influence and every government quietly paid for it anyway. Starling slipped through dead customs lanes and black market jump corridors, using stolen tags and Tyler's forged identities to vanish beneath the notice of anyone who wasn't already hunting them personally. Jake changed with the route. He spoke less. Slept less. Smiled rarely enough that Chloe started making terrible jokes on purpose just to test whether his face still knew how. He never turned cruel. That would have been easier for everyone. Instead he became sharper. Calmer. The kind of man who looked at danger and filed it alphabetically. Lyra stayed close without hovering. Sometimes that meant sitting with him in the cockpit through long silent burns. Sometimes it meant taking the next watch before he asked. Sometimes it meant stepping directly into his path when anger made his choices too fast. At a refuel lock above a smuggler moon, Jake came off a call with a weapons broker who had implied bloodline heirs could be sold in parts and went straight for the cargo ramp with murder in his stride. Lyra caught his wrist before he cleared the hatch. "You kill him," she said, "and 5 more take his chair by morning. He deserves it." "Yes." Which is why impatience would be a gift. He looked down at her hand on his arm. For a long second she thought he might pull away. Instead he stayed still and let out a breath that sounded scraped raw. "I don't know how to do this without him." "You do," she said. "You just hate that you have to." That landed harder than shouting would have. Their best lead came from Carthvale Exchange, a sprawling trade nexus built inside the hollow bones of a broken orbital ring where Imperial intelligence washed its hands through black auctions, fake shipping firms, and discreet private security contracts. If something moved through the Empire's darker networks, Carthvale knew its price. The cover identities were ugly by design. Jake became a mercenary broker with a reputation for solving sensitive cargo problems. Emma posed as a contract medic who asked no questions and charged like she enjoyed pain. Tyler slipped into the station net as a bookkeeping parasite with forged access to customs and debt ledgers. Lyra stayed hidden aboard Starling this time, and Jake hated that choice enough to know it was correct. Zane suffered most. They fitted him with a polished white servitor shell and a voice suppressor collar designed to make him sound pleasantly non-threatening. The effect was horrifying. He looked down at his own glossy exterior and said, "I would prefer execution." Emma adjusted the collar. "You'll survive. That is the problem. I will survive this memory." Carthvale smelled like coolant, old perfume, blood, and overheated wiring. The station never really slept. Markets glowed through drifting steam. Armed escorts moved in careful triangles. Data brokers sold secrets from hanging booths dressed like shrines. Somewhere beneath all that noise, the Empire bought loyalty one quiet atrocity at a time. Jake walked those corridors like he belonged there. He met traffickers. Ship captains. Debt runners. One war clerk with expensive teeth and a nervous habit of over-explaining military procurement routes. Tyler sifted transaction webs in the background, peeling patterns out of fake companies and vanished prisoner manifests. Emma kept them alive by looking like the one person in any room least interested in bluffing. 3 days in, they found the auction archive. Bloodline assets. Restricted transfers. Special operations procurement. Jake stood in a locked data chamber with Tyler's portable decoder humming between them while lists scrolled down the screen in pale green lines. Most of the entries were redacted. A few were not. Noble juveniles. Lineage fragments. Gene-coded interface candidates. Then one notation froze Tyler's hands. He looked up slowly. Jake. On the screen sat a transfer authorization attached to an Imperial Special Operations Unit operating off-ledger under command blackout conditions. No name. No full biometrics. Just a recovered prisoner designation, status changed from asset to operative after neurological conditioning review. And under physical remarks, one line. Twin pattern cognition. Human origin. Exceptional improvisational response. Jake stopped breathing for one beat. Not dead. Not proven alive either. But close enough to hurt. Then the chamber speakers crackled, and a calm male voice filled the room in flawless station trade. "You always were easy to bait, brother." The voice came from the ceiling speakers, calm, male, and so familiar it hit Jake like a punch to the lungs. For one impossible heartbeat, the whole data chamber stopped being real. The green archive light, the humming decoder, Tyler's breathing, the locked door behind them, all of it dropped away under one brutal fact. Luke was alive. Jake spun toward the nearest camera lens. Luke? Static answered first. Then the same voice, cooler now, carefully controlled. Do not say my name again in this room. Tyler had gone pale enough to look sick. That is either very good news or the universe has developed a personal grudge. Jake stepped closer to the console, fists clenched. Where are you? Busy keeping you from dying in a room full of alarms. A beat. Take the maintenance shaft behind panel 7. Left at the coolant run, right through the deck and lock, then don't stop moving until you hit dock channel 12. Emma's voice snapped over comms in Jake's ear. Security just rerouted. You've got armored response moving. Tyler was already stuffing the data core into a shield pouch. He's right. We need to go. Jake didn't move. Not until the speaker crackled one last time. Please, Jake. That did it. He ripped panel 7 off the wall so hard it bent in his hands. Behind it, a narrow maintenance shaft glowed with red emergency strips and old dust. Tyler dove in first with the core. Jake followed with one last look at the ceiling speaker, as if sheer anger might force his brother into view. The shaft dumped them into a service corridor already vibrating with boots and station alerts. Emma met them at the junction, pistol drawn, face hard. Tell me I heard what I think I heard. Jake's answer came out rough. Later. They ran. Carthvale's underlevels were a maze of hot pipes, dripping condensation, and badly maintained secrets. Steam burst from cracked valves. Sirens pulsed through the metal like a heartbeat trying to outrun itself. Tyler kept one hand on the wall and the other on his pad, following a route only somebody inside station security could have opened for them. This path shouldn't exist, he muttered. Emma glanced at Jake. Then it's him. At the deck and lock, they found the first bodies. 2 Imperial security officers lay unconscious against the wall with their helmets missing and their weapons neatly stacked beside them. Not dead. Just dropped fast and efficiently by someone who had needed the corridor quiet, not bloody. Jake crouched by one of them and touched the strike mark at the base of the neck. Twin work. He knew it instantly. Emotion hit so hard he had to stand back up before it showed too clearly. Emma saw anyway. She always did. But before she could say anything, the hatch at the end of the corridor slid open and a masked Imperial officer stepped through with a squad of black armored troopers behind him. Jake raised his weapon. The officer raised a hand. The squad stopped. Every instinct screamed trap. The man wore command black with no public insignia, half his face hidden beneath a matte tactical mask. One shoulder plate was scorched. His posture was rigid with the kind of control that only existed when somebody was holding themselves together through force. Then he tilted his head. Just slightly. A tiny, infuriating gesture Jake had seen his whole life. The world narrowed. Move, the officer said sharply, projecting command for the watching troopers. The asset team takes dock 12. I want the breach sealed behind them. The troopers obeyed without hesitation. Not because they trusted Jake's crew. Because they thought the masked officer was arresting them through a different route. The squad peeled away to cover the outer junction. Jake stared. The officer stepped close enough that only Jake, Emma, and Tyler could hear him. You've got 90 seconds before somebody smarter checks the reroute. Emma's voice dropped. Luke. The masked man flinched once at the name, then reached up and disengaged the lower half of the mask. Everything in Jake went still. Luke looked thinner. Harder. There was a scar cutting through one eyebrow now, and whatever the Empire had done to him had left a coldness around the edges that had not been there before. But it was him. Completely, painfully him. Jake crossed the distance and hit him in a violent half-embrace, half-impact that nearly drove both of them into the wall. You're alive, Jake said, and it came out sounding almost angry. Luke grabbed his shoulder just as hard. Yeah. Apparently I'm difficult to kill. For half a second neither of them let go. Then urgency crushed the moment flat. Luke stepped back first. Listen to me carefully. I can't leave. Jake's face changed instantly. No. I'm inside a black unit embedded in Project Security. They think I broke under conditioning and rebuilt useful. As long as they believe that, I get access. To what? Tyler asked. Luke's jaw tightened. A weapons platform. Hidden. Mobile. Designed for preemptive planetary erasure. His eyes went to Jake. Earth is on the projection list. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. They're planning to remove humanity before first contact becomes organized resistance. Even Emma went still at that. Jake shook his head once. Then we take you now and burn the cover. Luke grabbed the front of Jake's jacket. If you do that, we lose the only eyes inside the project. You're my brother. And I'm already here. The words landed like shrapnel. Tyler swallowed. Can you get us the files? Luke pulled a slim black data wafer from inside his armored sleeve and slapped it into Tyler's hand. Partial routes, power signatures, procurement chains. It's dirty, but it'll prove the project is real. A small sound came from the corridor behind them. Lyra. Jake turned. She had come down from the dock access against orders, breathless from the sprint, dark hood thrown back. The moment her eyes found Luke, 100 emotions crossed her face too fast to name. Relief. Fury. Grief. Hope. You let him believe you were dead, she said. Luke looked at her with something gentler than his voice had managed for anyone else. I let the Empire believe they owned the ending. That is not better. No, he said. It's just useful. Station alarms rose another level. Somewhere above them, a blast door slammed. Luke resealed the mask and stepped back into command posture. You need to run now. Dock 12. Cargo tug Sigma Ed. I cleared it for launch under seizure authority. Jake's voice broke at the edges. I'm not doing this twice. Luke held his gaze. You're not. Next time, I'm walking out. It was a promise and a lie and a prayer all at once. Then he turned, barked an order in perfect Imperial cadence, and strode back toward the converging security teams like he belonged to them. Back aboard Starling, Jake stood in the cargo bay with both hands braced on a crate until his knuckles went white. Emma stayed nearby without speaking. Tyler worked the stolen wafer through 3 decoders, every passing second carving more tension into the room. Finally, his scream resolved. He looked up, shaken. Luke was telling the truth. Jake didn't turn. Tyler's voice dropped lower. This isn't a raid plan. It's extermination math. On the screen, the hidden project name burned in red beside one target category. Pre-contact human homeworld. Earth looked painfully ordinary from orbit, which made the threat against it feel even meaner. Blue oceans. Cloud bands. City lights threaded across the night side like patient veins. Jake stood on Starling's bridge with Luke's stolen files open across the main display and felt something cold settle into place inside him. 4 months the war had lived in hidden docks, dead moons, black markets, and forgotten ice fields. Now it had a home address. Tyler Brooks broke the silence first. They tagged Earth as a scheduled variable, not a hypothetical. That means procurement, targeting, route prep, all of it is already moving. Emma Hayes folded her arms. And if we transmit this blind, Earth Command calls us paranoid smugglers with a stolen alien fairy tale. Jake looked at the planet below. Then we don't transmit blind. He brought Starling in hot. The orbital defense ring above Earth was a rough necklace of station guns, customs platforms, old patrol frigates, and newly welded panic. Human military traffic flooded every channel as soon as the freighter crossed into control space. Warnings flashed. Interceptors launched. Somebody on a command carrier demanded identification with the exact tone of voice bureaucrats used when they hoped their paperwork could intimidate physics. Jake opened a direct line and put the truth where nobody could ignore it. This is Jake Carter aboard independent freighter Starling. We are carrying verified enemy project data, one living heir tied to Imperial command architecture, and enough evidence to explain why your planet is already on someone else's execution schedule. If you waste the next 5 minutes doubting me, you lose the right to complain about the next 5 years. Tyler blinked. You really have stopped pretending diplomacy matters. It mattered, Jake said. Then they put Earth on a list. That got them in. The briefing chamber in high orbit smelled like coffee, recycled air, and institutional skepticism. Uniformed officials sat around a curved tactical table trying very hard to look unimpressed by the patched freighter crew standing in front of them. Lyra remained straight-backed despite the eyes on her. Emma looked 1 second away from diagnosing everyone in the room with terminal arrogance. Tyler had 4 screens open. Zane stood near the back wall with his arms folded and an expression that suggested he was judging the room's wiring on moral grounds. An admiral with silver hair and tired eyes tapped the table. Convince me. Jake nodded to Tyler. The stolen files unfolded above the room in red layers, supply chains, deep black project compartments, projected strike routes, weapon geometry, and Earth's name embedded in a timeline no one at the table had known existed. As the data rolled, the room changed. Skepticism gave way to calculation. Calculation gave way to fear. One analyst whispered, "This is real." Lyra stepped forward before anyone could turn that fear into the wrong question. "The Empire does not target your world because of an accident," she said. "It targets you because humanity is unpredictable, adaptive, and difficult to rule. You are being marked before you fully enter the board." Another official looked at her like a problem instead of a person. "And your role in this?" Jake answered before she had to. "Witness. Source. LA. Not your weapon." The room went quiet again. That was how Earth entered the war, not with one speech, but with 1,000 overlapping acts of organized panic. Shipyards changed production schedules overnight. Civilian transports were refitted into supply haulers. Orbital guns were dragged out of storage and upgraded until they barely resembled what they had been built to do. Defense planners started sleeping in offices. Governments argued in public and cooperated in private. Human history, as usual, responded to catastrophe by becoming loud, messy, and terrifyingly efficient. Starling's crew became useful in ways none of them had planned for. Jake worked with command teams on irregular engagement logic, teaching them how the Empire thought when it believed itself superior. Emma reorganized triage flows and emergency casualty planning until 3 military hospitals changed their protocol because she insulted the old one hard enough. Tyler became the bridge between captured enemy systems and Earth's increasingly shameless hacking initiatives. Nora Bennett coordinated medical contingencies for alien physiology so Lyra would stop being the only reference point in the room. Lyra hated the meetings most. Too many people looked at her and saw leverage. Ancient bloodline access. Command potential. A living key somebody might be tempted to point at a battlefield and call strategy. Jake noticed every time it happened. He never let it stand. During one planning session, a defense contractor in a polished uniform referred to her as the air asset. Jake's chair scraped back so sharply it silenced the entire room. "No," he said. The contractor frowned. "Excuse me? She is not an asset. She is the reason you even know what's coming." His voice stayed level, which somehow made it hit harder. "If you want her help, ask for it like she's a person. If you want to reduce her to equipment, do it outside my hearing." Lyra didn't speak until later, when they stood alone in one of the station's observation corridors and watched Tugcraft haul armor plating toward a half-built defense ship. "You didn't have to do that," she said. Jake looked out at the moving lights. "Yes, I did. Something softened in her face then, fragile and fierce all at once. Below the level of admirals and planners, the mobilization spread through the human system in weirder ways. Chloe Dawson and Kai Walker, to everyone's surprise except their own, became useful training nightmares for new recruits. They ran simulation drills built around battlefield nonsense, false retreats, signal confusion, bad visibility, enemy arrogance, human improvisation. Half the trainees complained. The smarter half started winning. Zane took over an engineering bay and verbally assaulted anyone who treated alien tech like magic. Your design philosophy, he told a stunned team of human shipbuilders, is reckless, adorable, and somehow effective. You should be embarrassed by how much I respect it. One engineer actually wrote that down. For a while, hope became possible. Not safety. Not peace. But shape. Momentum. A chance. Then Luke went silent. 1 day. 3 days. 8. 2 weeks. No covert burst, no hidden route marker, no twin-coded trick hidden in background traffic. Jake stopped pretending the silence didn't scrape at him. He checked secure channels too often. Slept too little. Worked until exhaustion blurred the edges. Lyra stayed near him through all of it, never asking for promises he could not give. The message came at 0317 station time. Tyler shouted first, voice cracking through the comms hub. Jake. Everybody, now. The encrypted burst had piggybacked on a debris survey packet and burned itself after receipt, classic Luke. Tyler reconstructed just enough of it to project on the main display. The message contained no greeting, no sentiment, no wasted motion. Project active. Launch complete. Interception window collapsing. Then one final line appeared beneath the coordinates. The superweapon is already moving toward Earth. The first sign of the assault was not the ships. It was the shadow. Earth's daylight dimmed by degrees as the superweapon platform crawled into position above the defensive plane, vast enough to blot out whole chunks of reflected sunlight from orbit. Around it came the Imperial strike formations in layered waves, escorts wrapped around the core like blades around a throat. Human defense stations fired first, then second, then all at once, and still the enemy kept coming. Normal tactics lasted 7 minutes before reality made fun of them. On Starling's command deck, every screen bled red. Tyler Brooks was buried in live telemetry, jaw tight, hands moving so fast across the console they looked angry. Chloe Dawson sat at drone control beside him, feeding command strings into 6 swarms at once. Emma Hayes stood in the medical routing station with casualty grids open over 3 sectors, already triaging ships she had not yet lost. Lyra remained at the relic console near the center of the deck, one hand pressed to the pendant now seated in an improvised command cradle. Jake Carter stood at the forward rail watching Earth fight under a sky that had gone mechanical. Then Luke walked onto the bridge. Not as a ghost. Not as a voice in a speaker. Not as a coded message buried in enemy traffic. Physically. Bleeding, burned at one shoulder, still wearing half an Imperial tactical coat over stolen combat webbing. For one shocked beat nobody moved. Jake turned, saw him, and all the months of held breath broke in his face at once. You are a deeply irritating person to lose. Luke's mouth twitched despite the blood at his temple. And yet you keep doing it badly. That was enough. No long speech. No dramatic embrace. The battle was too large for that. But Jake crossed the deck, gripped the back of Luke's neck, and hit him once in the shoulder in the closest thing twins ever had to a reunion ritual. You're late, Jake said. Luke looked at the tactical board. Traffic was terrible. The moment shattered under another orbital impact. The superweapon's outer defense ring fired, slicing an Earth destroyer clean through the middle. Debris spun across the battle map. Human lines bent under the pressure. Jake turned back to command. Status. Terrible, Tyler said. Conventional attack lanes collapse as soon as they enter the platform's defense geometry. We keep fighting it head-on, we die beautifully and uselessly. Luke limped to the board, scanned it once, then looked at Jake. Something old and dangerous slid into place between them. Then stop making them fight what's real, Luke said. Jake's eyes narrowed. You have something. I was inside their command logic. The lower fleets trust system certainty more than orders under stress. If we make the battlefield lie convincingly enough, half their coordination turns into panic management. Tyler looked up sharply. You want to gaslight an empire? Luke pointed at him. Exactly. See? He gets me. The plan came together at brutal speed. Not because it was safe. Because there was no time left for anything else. Tyler seized the outer battle space first, injecting false vectors into debris clutter, spoofing long-range returns, and creating phantom approach signatures at the edges of Imperial confidence. Chloe launched drone swarms in fractured patterns designed to mimic heavy capital profiles, not through realism, but through sensor psychology. Tiny machines moved where giant ships should not have been, and because the returns looked wrong in exactly the right ways, enemy targeting software treated them seriously. Kai Walker routed those false readings across civilian satellite ghosts and abandoned cargo frames, turning clutter into fake fleets. Human defense ships began pulling back on purpose, not in retreat, but to let the lie breathe. What am I looking at? One Earth Admiral demanded over the channel. Jake answered without apology. A battlefield with options. At the communications spine, Zane Mercer rolled his shoulder mount into place and loaded the language packs he had stolen from 3 different Imperial branches. I want the record to show, he said, that I am about to weaponize bureaucracy, which is the lowest form of warfare. Make it count, Emma said. Zane did. Across the enemy channels, every lower deck relay, secondary command display, and auxiliary threat monitor suddenly flashed with the same warning in cold, official script. Biosecurity breach. Terran cognitive pathogen vector unconfirmed. Immediate quarantine protocol advised. Then came the voice layer. Zane spoke in perfect clipped Imperial command cadence, dry enough to sound authentic and terrifying enough to spread like poison. Attention all subordinate crews. Unscreened exposure to Terran improvisational contagion may result in doctrinal collapse, emotional unpredictability, and unauthorized tactical creativity. If symptoms include initiative, distrust of hierarchy, or sudden respect for mammals, isolate immediately. On Chloe's station, 3 Imperial wings broke formation at once. Tyler almost laughed. They're buying it. Luke shook his head. Not all of them. Keep pressure on the uncertain ones. Jake moved through the bridge like a conductor in a riot, rerouting ship groups, feeding false retreat lanes to enemy observers, and timing human counterfire to match the moment Imperial confidence dipped. The twins did not mirror each other. They never had. Jake leaned into instinct and psychological force. Luke attacked structure, rhythm, and predictive assumptions. Together they created openings no algorithm should have allowed. Lyra closed her eyes at the relic station and let the pendant's old authority threads move through her. The superweapon had deeper systems than the Empire understood. Buried command channels. Ancient scaffold layers beneath the stolen outer architecture. Her bloodline could still touch parts of it. She inhaled sharply as silver light raced under her skin. I have partial access. Emma looked over from the casualty board. How partial? Enough to blind sections of the defense lattice if I keep contact. Not enough to survive being interrupted. Jake crossed to her side for half a second, just long enough to rest a hand against her shoulder. Then nobody interrupts you. The shift was immediate. A slice of the superweapon's automated turret ring went dark. Then another. Earth's nearest defense group punched into the opening with everything it had. Rail strikes. Missiles. Heat lances. The enemy platform reeled just enough for human ships to bite deeper than they had any right to. The bluff was working. Not winning. Never that clean. Working. Through smoke, static, false signals, and broken formation, The whole battle twisted away from certainty and into human territory, messy, adaptive, impossible to map in advance. The Empire did not know how to stay calm inside a lie that kept changing shape. Then Lyra gasped. Every console near the relic station flashed white. The pendant lifted from its cradle on a column of light and projected a narrow vector straight through the chaos, beyond the superweapon, beyond the flagship riding behind it, towards something hidden deeper in the enemy formation. The path cut through armor geometry and layered command encryption like they were only surface paint over something older. Luke stared at the beam. That wasn't us. Lyra's face had gone pale. No, she whispered. It's opening. Jake turned toward the new vector as the battle raged around Earth and felt the shape of the war change again. Because buried behind the enemy flagship, something ancient had just answered her.
The chamber beyond the flagship did not feel built. It felt remembered. Black walls curved like polished bone around a vast circular vault where silver light moved through the surfaces as if the whole place were thinking. The air carried a strange scent, half ozone, half rain on hot stone, and every step Jake took across the dark floor sent faint ripples through the material under his boots. It was not metal. It was older than metal. Older, maybe, than the Empire itself. Lyra stopped at the threshold and went still. The pendant at her throat pulsed once, then answered the chamber with a low harmonic tone that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Emma Hayes sucked in a breath behind them and pressed 2 fingers to her temple. The visions that had haunted her since Lyra came aboard Starling were no longer fragments now. In this place, they had shape. It's not a control room, Emma said softly. It's a judgment core. Luke looked out over the vault, expression sharpening as the tactical parts of his mind stitched the geometry together. Then whoever's waiting down there thinks he already passed. At the center of the chamber stood a throne built out of stolen history. The Overlord was fused into it. He had once been a ruler, maybe even a man, but now his body vanished in a branching black-white architecture that climbed through his spine, ribs, and arms like roots strangling a statue. Veins of artificial light pulsed beneath his skin. Ancient control filaments wrapped his throat and temples. His eyes glowed with the hard, borrowed brightness of someone who had replaced authority with theft and decided that made them the same thing. When he saw Lyra, he smiled. There you are, he said. His voice did not come from his mouth alone. It arrived through the chamber itself, amplified by living walls and command systems that hated obeying him but obeyed anyway. Jake felt it in his teeth. Lyra stepped forward despite the fear, trying to lock her knees. You do not own this place. The Overlord's smile widened. I own what answers. Not for long, Jake said. Ryan Cole took position behind a shattered support arch with Nora Bennett beside him, field kit open and sidearm ready. They had fought their way too far to let the wounded line collapse now. Behind them, distant impact from the outer battle still trembled through the structure in slow, thunder-like waves. Earth was still fighting above them. That pressure hung over every second here. The Overlord rose just enough to prove the throne was not holding him up. He was holding it down. You misunderstand your role, he said to Lyra. You were never meant to oppose me. You were bred to complete me. Jake moved before the rage hit full temperature, but Luke was already moving too. That was the terrible beauty of them. They never fought like mirrors. Jake attacked pressure and presence, drawing the eye, the weapon lines, the instinctive reaction. Luke moved like a structural flaw in reality, finding angles no one thought to guard because nobody sane would have chosen them. Together, they became harder to predict than any doctrine built for orderly war. The Overlord drove a blast of force through the chamber. Jake took it on one shoulder and slammed sideways into a pillar hard enough to rattle bone. Luke slid low under the second strike, came up inside the throne's flank, and drove a charge blade into a glowing seam before the Overlord flung him backward with a snap of command energy. Emma's eyes were open now, but she was not seeing the chamber the way the others were. Left arc, she shouted. Jake, 2 steps. Luke, lower lattice, not the shoulder. Jake trusted her before he understood why. He shifted exactly where she yelled, and a kill pulse scorched past the space his chest had occupied a fraction earlier. Luke hit the lower lattice instead of the armored flank, and the throne shell spasmed as hidden support channels ruptured. The Overlord turned toward Emma with sudden fury. Seer. Ryan put 2 rounds into the nearest control node before the tyrant could strike her cleanly. Nora dragged a wounded crewman behind cover, slapped a seal patch over a chest wound, and didn't even look up while she worked. Everyone keeps nearly dying in inconvenient directions, Nora snapped. I'd appreciate some discipline. Zane's voice cut through the combat channel from a systems relay he had somehow hacked mid-battle. Good news. I have found a legal argument. Jake, bleeding and half laughing from the absurdity, shouted back, "What?" The Overlord is not a sovereign, Zane said. He is malfunctioning property. Even in that moment, Luke barked a laugh. Zane kept going, fingers surely flying somewhere beyond sight. This chamber still runs ancient infrastructure law. His command signature is counterfeit. His integration status is invasive, and his modifications qualify as contamination of protected systems. In summary, he is a biohazard wearing a crown. Lyra's pen blazed brighter. The chamber heard him. The walls shifted tone. The floor's symbols, dead and obedient under the Overlord a heartbeat earlier, flashed white in concentric circles. The throne beneath him locked rigid. For the first time, the Overlord looked uncertain. Lyra lifted her hand toward the heart of the chamber. Then let it judge. She pressed the pendant against the central command pillar. Everything changed. Silver light tore outward through the vault. Not wild, but deliberate. The chamber scanned the Overlord's bloodline markers, command threads, force grafts, and stolen access chains. One by one, his false permissions began to fail. The throne unwrapped from him in burning lines. The living architecture that had obeyed him turned against him with the cold precision of systems correcting an old error. He screamed then, not grandly, not like a tyrant, like a man learning too late that power borrowed through fear has no roots. Jake and Luke moved together through the falling debris and collapsing command arcs, forcing him back, cutting off the exits he never thought he'd need. Emma kept calling openings from the half-vision state that left her trembling but accurate. Ryan held the rear angle. Nora kept people alive with one bloody hand and a voice mean enough to frighten death itself. The heart woke in the center of the chamber. It rose from beneath the floor in a sphere of layered light and dark, as if memory itself had condensed into machinery. The whole vault bowed toward it. The Overlord did not. He tried to seize it one last time. The heart answered by stripping the last shard of command from him. The throne collapsed. So did he. Silence hit the chamber like impact. For one impossible second, victory existed. Then the heart opened wider, and a column of light drove straight upward through the flagship, through the battle, through orbit, and into the stars beyond known maps. Emma looked up, face gone pale. That isn't a pulse. Lyra stared into the rising beam and whispered the only honest word left. No, because somewhere far beyond the war they had just survived, something answered back. Victory did not arrive like a parade. It came apart in fragments. Across liberated systems, prison ships drifted powerless while sealed cells clicked open one lock at a time. Labor camps lost command relays and went dark. In refinery tunnels, wrecked ports, and factory districts that had forgotten sunlight, survivors stepped into freedom with the cautious faces of people who had been punished too often to trust an unlocked door. Some cried, some ran, some just stood still and looked at the sky like it might vanish if they blinked. At the shattered fortress where the war had broken open, Jake Carter and his people stood together without incoming fire telling them where to move next. The silence felt strange. Not peaceful exactly, just empty in a way none of them knew how to read yet. Smoke still climbed from broken towers. Melted armor stank in the cold air. Emergency lights flashed over cracked stone and torn metal while survivors moved through the ruins carrying stretchers, ration crates, and names of the dead. The battle had ended, but its shape still clung to everything. Jake stood in the courtyard with Lyra beside him and watched freed prisoners come through the breach gates under armed escort, that no longer needed weapons. Luke leaned against a fractured support pillar with his arms folded, pale from blood loss and healing too slowly for anybody's taste. Emma Hayes had been on her feet for 19 hours and still somehow looked ready to start another war if one interrupted her casualty triage. Tyler Brooks was rebuilding a communications net out of wreckage and profanity. Nora Bennett moved from patient to patient with the sharp efficiency of someone who had not accepted the concept of stopping yet. Chloe Dawson and Kai Walker hauled water packs to people twice their size and acted offended whenever anyone tried to help them. Near the center of the courtyard, Zane Mercer looked around at the wreckage, the smoke, the survivors, and the fact that everybody he cared about was somehow still breathing. He sighed through his speaker grill. "Survival," he said, "remains the universe's rudest habit." It got the first real laugh. Not big one. Not clean. More like a crack in a wall. Everyone had been holding up with their backs. Jake laughed first, because once Zane said it out loud, the absurdity of still being alive became too large not to. Emma shook her head and laughed too. Chloe nearly dropped a ration crate. Even Luke smiled, which on him looked suspiciously like a small concession to gravity. Later, when food finally moved through the courtyard in patched bowls and stolen trays, the names began. No ceremony had been planned. That made it better. One by one, people spoke the names of those who had not crossed into the morning with them. Soldiers, mechanics, dock workers, children, strangers who had died brave and friends who had died angry, and everyone in between. Nobody gave grand speeches. Nobody needed them. The act of saying the names was enough. Lyra stepped forward at last. The courtyard quieted for her, not because she was royal, but because they all knew what it had cost her to still be standing. She wore no crown, no formal insignia, just dark clothes marked by battle and the pendant that had stopped being a symbol and become history in motion. "I was sold once," she said, voice steady despite the wind. "I was told it made me less. You did not treat me that way. None of you did." She looked across the gathered survivors, then down at the names written in chalk and grease and blood-smudged ink. "So, I will honor the dead, not as a queen above them, but as one of the living they carried forward." When she began speaking the names, Jake stayed beside her. Months later, after Earth had stopped shaking from the war and started rebuilding itself around the scars, he stood beside her again on a hillside overlooking the sea. Their wedding was quiet by choice. No official stage, no military pageantry, no audience bigger than family and the few friends who had earned the right to witness something gentle. The sky was clear. The wind smelled like salt and summer grass. Luke stood near Jake in a jacket he hated. Emma handled half the ceremony logistics because she trusted nobody else to do it without accidentally starting a diplomatic incident. Zane complained that formal were restricted his intimidation profile, and then showed up polished anyway. Jake and Lyra chose each other without fanfare. That mattered more than anything louder would have. In the months that followed, Earth rebuilt with the speed of a species that had never once mistaken damage for finality. Shipyards expanded. Orbital defense grids doubled. Trade lanes reopened under joint patrols. Human and alien delegates argued, mistrusted one another, nearly walked out of 6 different alliance meetings, and then kept coming back because the alternative was worse. Emma helped establish emergency medical exchange protocols between worlds that had only recently stopped pointing guns at each other. Tyler became the sleepless backbone of a shared intelligence network built out of stolen archives, captured relays, and human refusal to leave useful secrets buried. Chloe and Kai, to their delight, kept embarrassing older officers by being right about irregular combat models. Nora turned her wartime field systems into practical survival doctrine. Zane lectured engineers across 3 planets about structural incompetence and somehow became respected for it. Yet peace never fully settled. The heart signal had gone out beyond known space, and it did not fade with time. It lingered in the relic fragments, in old command harmonics, and in the low-level background noise Tyler kept insisting was not background at all. Luke joined him in the lab often, the two of them circling the mystery from opposite angles. Tyler attacked data patterns. Luke attacked assumptions. Between them, the fragments finally began to open. One night, long after the others had gone to bed, the main projection table flooded silver. Jake and Lyra came in first. Emma followed, hair half tied back, looking suspicious of any problem that woke her after midnight. Zane rolled in behind her, muttering that revelations should at least respect maintenance schedules. On the table, the relic shards rotated in a slow ring of light. Lines connected. Symbols translated. A map took shape. Lyra stepped closer, face lit by the glow. "That place," she whispered. "I know the pattern." Luke looked up from the console. "You should. These coordinates point to the first vault of your bloodline, not the Imperial court. Earlier than that, original architecture." Tyler enlarged the route. And that's not all. Beneath the first coordinate chain, new symbols began writing themselves in the projection. Slower, older, stranger. The geometry did not match Lyra's relic systems cleanly. It felt deeper than the bloodline, like the message was not for descendants, but for the lock beneath them. Jake stared at the second path as it extended into a region of black space, no chart in the room recognized. "Tell me that's a glitch," Emma said. "No," Tyler answered softly. Lyra did not look away from the forming map. "It's answering the signal." The second set of coordinates finished writing, and none of them belonged to anywhere the known galaxy was supposed to have remembered. Warning arrived without motion. No jump flare, no approach vector, no long-range engine bloom crawling across deep space charts. 1 second, the outer system monitors showed empty black beyond the last patrol lane. The next, every sensor on 3 continents lit up with the same impossible mass hanging just past the edge of the solar boundary, like it had been waiting there longer than the stars. Connor did not have time to call anyone before the relic fragments in his lab woke all at once. The room went white. Ancient shards lifted off the table in a storm of silver light, spinning so fast they blurred into a ring. Symbols spilled across the walls, the floor, the ceiling, and every active screen in reach. The station shook as emergency alarms rolled through the base, but the sound felt far away under the pressure of the message forcing itself into shape. Jake hit the lab first, rifle half lifted by instinct. Luke came in behind him with a hand already on his sidearm. Lyra entered last and stopped so suddenly it looked like the truth had physically struck her. Projected above the fragments hung an image of the structure. It was colossal, angular, and wrong in the way only very old things could be. Black arcs circled a hollow center larger than some moons, and long vertical spines stretched outward like anchors meant to pin reality in place. It did not resemble a ship or station built for life. It looked like a lock with the door missing. Connor finally found his voice. "Please tell me one of you knows what that is." Lyra stared at the projection, face drained of color. "No," she whispered, "but I know what it means." The fragments shifted again. A translation field rippled through the room, rough at first, then sharpening until the message became human-readable. Custodian line compromised. Containment threshold failing. Return required. Emma Hayes arrived in the doorway carrying a med kit she had clearly grabbed because history had taught her revelations usually drew blood. "That sounds bad." "It's worse," Lyra said. Everyone looked at her. For a long second, she said nothing, like speaking would make the truth more real. Then she lifted one trembling hand toward the floating fragments, and the symbols bent to meet her. "My bloodline was never made to rule an empire," she said quietly. "We were made to monitor a sealed system, to authenticate it, to keep something ancient contained if the gate ever woke again." Jake stepped closer. "What kind of something?" Lyra's eyes stayed on the projection. "The kind nobody trusted to die." That landed hard. Outside the lab, the base had already shifted into war rhythm. Klaxons wailed. Launch crews ran. Tactical officers shouted over one another as deep space feeds updated and somehow kept getting worse. The impossible structure had not fired, moved, or spoken again, but its presence alone was changing gravitational readings at the edge of the system. Space around it looked subtly bent, as if local physics had started asking permission. Luke folded his arms, studying the rotating symbols. So the Empire spent generations abusing a bloodline designed to hold back a cosmic nightmare. That's aggressively stupid, even by Imperial standards. Connor snorted once. For them, that's practically a mission statement. Zane Mercer rolled into the lab with a toolbox in one hand and fresh annoyance in the other. I was in the middle of not fighting for my life, he said. Explain why the room is haunted again. No haunting, Emma replied. Just a universe-ending lock failure. Zane paused. I regret asking. The command center filled fast after that. Earth defense officials, Alliance envoys, orbital commanders, engineering teams, and exactly 3 politicians who all stopped talking the moment the real data came up. No one needed convincing this time. The thing beyond the solar edge had bypassed skepticism by existing too hard. Tyler Brooks pushed the projection wider over the tactical table. The old coordinates from the heart weren't just a destination. They were a warning route. This structure matches the second coordinate family, not the first. Connor pointed to a cluster of nested symbols rotating near the center. And this part links directly to Lyra's line architecture, which means if there's any way to interact with it safely, she's the key. Jake's jaw tightened before anyone could say the obvious next sentence. Lyra said it for them. Then I'm going. No. Jake answered immediately. She turned to face him. There was fear in her expression, but no uncertainty. If I stay here, that changes nothing. It changes whether I lose you to something older than reason. It changes whether I hide, while everyone else pays the price. Her voice softened. Not weaker, but more dangerous for it. Jake, I spent too much of my life being moved around like an object other people were afraid of. I won't do that now. Not with this. Silence held for half a breath. Then Jake exhaled through his nose. The fight not gone, but redirected. Then you don't go alone. Luke stepped up on his right side. That part's non-negotiable. That was the answer, in the end. Not despair. Not surrender. Reunion. By dusk, rain hammered the launch field in silver sheets. Floodlights cut through the storm and painted the new dreadnought in pale white streaks as ground crews made final checks beneath its massive hull. The ship was human-built in all the stubborn ways that mattered and alien-shaped in all the terrifying ways that had proven useful. Salvaged Imperial plating armored the spine. Reverse-engineered relic systems glowed beneath the skin. Rail batteries lined the flanks. The prow carried no royal emblem, no military crest, only a simple painted name, Resolute. Jake walked toward the ramp with his rifle slung across his back. Luke matched stride beside him, adjusting a fresh set of field gauntlets with the expression of a man accepting that peace had once again been a scheduling error. Emma and Nora moved ahead toward the medbay manifest. Tyler and Connor were already arguing over signal architecture. Chloe and Kai loaded drone racks, while Ryan checked boarding locks. Nobody had been ordered into this. They had simply come. Zane stood at the bottom of the ramp, reattaching his battle cannon with theatrical disgust. The magnetic lock clamped into place with a heavy metallic thunk. My retirement, he announced to the rain, was insultingly brief and emotionally underfunded. Kai grinned. You missed us. I missed competent maintenance standards, Zane said. You people are a traveling emergency. Lyra came down the floodlit path last. She wore dark field armor threaded with silver relay filaments. The relic fragments secured in a cradle at her chest. Rain streaked through her hair. For a second, the whole field seemed to narrow around her, not because she was royal, but because she had stopped running from the shape of her own history. Jake met her halfway to the ramp. You sure? He asked. No, she said honestly, but I'm ready. He touched his forehead lightly to hers, rain sliding cold between them. That's good enough. They boarded with the others and took their places while the storm rattled against the hull. Engines began to rise beneath their feet, deep and hungry and steady. On the main forward display, the impossible structure beyond the edge of the system burned like a black star waiting to be challenged. Connor strapped in and looked over at Tyler. You know this is a terrible idea. Tyler gave him a thin smile. Yes. Fortunately, we've refined terrible. At the helm, Luke rolled his shoulders once. Jake settled beside him. And humanity's stubborn found family launched into the dark, ready to bluff the end of the cosmos and see if it blinked first.